After 5 years of a global T-virus outbreak, less than 7% of our species would still be alive. How does Resident Evil zombie virus push our civilization to the brink of extinction? It happens in 6 brutal stages, each one revealing why our real-world defenses would crumble faster than anything Hollywood shows us. Today, we're running the numbers on humanity's actual survival odds if the T-virus outbreak happened tomorrow. We'll track government response protocols, military containment failures, and the brutal mathematics of global pandemic spread. By the end, you'll know exactly how we reached that devastating 7%. The first victims start showing symptoms that look eerily familiar to medical professionals: fever, aggression, confusion, bleeding from the eyes and mouth. Emergency room doctors would initially diagnose this as hemorrhagic fever, maybe Ebola or Marburg virus. They'd follow standard protocols: isolation, contact tracing, notification to the CDC. But the T-virus operates on a completely different timeline than natural pathogens. While Ebola takes days to weeks to progress, the T-virus would cause complete cellular breakdown and reanimation within hours. The CDC's response protocols are built for viruses that follow predictable patterns. They expect a 2 to 21 day incubation period, not 2 to 6 hours. Here's where traditional quarantine fails catastrophically. You quarantine the living, not the dead. When patients flatline and then get back up, every medical protocol becomes useless. Hospital staff would be the first to die, not from treating patients, but from being attacked by them. The infection spreads through direct fluid contact, but unlike rabies, which requires deep tissue penetration, T-virus transmission would be almost instantaneous through any open wound. Government agencies would make their first critical mistake here, treating this like a biological weapon instead of something completely unprecedented. They deploy hazmat teams and establish perimeters, but you can't contain something that doesn't stay dead. At this stage, with outbreaks limited to maybe 3 or 4 hospitals, humanity's survival odds would still be around 85%. The virus is contained, but every hour of misdiagnosis makes containment exponentially harder. When civilian authorities fail, the military steps in. Real biocontainment procedures involve establishing multiple perimeter zones, deploying specialized CBRN units, and coordinating with international health organizations. But Umbrella's private military response in the game shows us something crucial. Conventional weapons barely slow down reanimation tissue. A standard military rifle fires a 5.56mm round at 3,000 feet per second. That's enough to drop a living human instantly through shock and blood loss. But zombified tissue doesn't experience shock. And blood loss doesn't matter when the circulatory system isn't functioning normally. You need precise headshots to destroy the brainstem, and even elite soldiers struggle with that level of accuracy under combat stress. Now factor in the Nemesis problem. Bioweapons like Tyrants represent something no military has ever trained for: intelligent, nearly indestructible enemies with superhuman strength and speed. A Tyrant can punch through concrete walls and survive direct hits from anti-tank weapons. Even if we compare STAR's team's capabilities to real special forces, the numbers don't add up. Navy SEALs and Delta Force operators are incredibly skilled, but they're still human. Communication breakdown becomes critical here. As infected zones expand beyond initial perimeters, command structures start failing. Radio chatter becomes chaotic, supply lines get cut off, and coordination between units breaks down. Military doctrine assumes you're fighting an enemy that follows some kind of tactical logic. Zombies don't retreat, they don't need supply lines, and they don't get demoralized. By day 3, multiple cities would be showing signs of infection. International borders would start closing, but it's already too late. Air travel, shipping routes, and refugee movements have already carried the virus to major population centers worldwide. Military containment will be failing on multiple fronts, with infected zones expanding beyond any manageable perimeter. Humanity's survival odds drop to about 60%. We're still fighting, but we're losing ground fast. Social media changes everything. In Raccoon City, information was controlled through traditional media channels. Today, every citizen has a smartphone capable of live streaming the apocalypse in real time. Videos of zombie attacks would go viral within minutes, causing panic that spreads faster than the virus itself. 24-hour news cycles would amplify the chaos exponentially. Cable news networks would compete for the most dramatic footage, probably getting camera crews killed in the process. Misinformation would spread just as quickly as accurate reports. Some people would deny the outbreak entirely. Others would blame government conspiracies, and many would simply panic and flee, carrying the infection to previously safe areas. Governments face an impossible choice: nuclear sterilization versus letting the infection spread. The Raccoon City solution, dropping a nuclear warhead on infected areas, becomes the only option. But in reality, no democratic government could authorize nuclear strikes on its own cities without massive political upheaval. The debate alone would waste precious time while the infection spreads. Evacuation protocols designed for hurricanes and earthquakes fail completely against intelligent bioweapons. Emergency shelters become death traps when infected individuals hide their symptoms to gain entry. Transportation networks become vectors for transmission rather than escape routes. International response would be too little, too late. One infected person on an international flight could seed outbreaks on multiple continents simultaneously. Real pharmaceutical companies would face the same challenges as Umbrella, but without the bioweapons expertise. Developing a vaccine or treatment would take months or years, not the convenient plot devices we see in games. Corporate conspiracy theories would flourish, but the truth would be simpler and more terrifying. Nobody knows how to stop this. By week 2, government systems would be breaking down as officials flee or die. Panic would be accelerating global spread threat faster than any containment effort could match. Humanity's survival odds plummet to 35%. We're no longer fighting a virus. We're fighting the collapse of civilization itself. By month 1, the T-virus has found transmission vectors the games never explored. International airports become super spreader hubs as infected passengers board flights before symptoms appear. Cargo ships, carrying infected crew members to ports worldwide, seeding outbreaks in coastal cities from Los Angeles to Rotterdam. Refugee movements from initial outbreak zones scatter infected individuals across borders faster than any tracking system can monitor. Climate and population density create wildly different spread patterns. The virus thrives in temperate urban environments, but struggles in extreme heat or cold. Cities like Mumbai and Lagos see explosive growth due to dense populations and limited medical infrastructure. Meanwhile, places like Siberia and northern Canada experience slower transmission rates, buying those regions precious time. Infrastructure collapse happens faster than anyone predicted. Power grids fail when plant operators abandon their posts or become infected. Supply chains break down as truck drivers refuse to enter infected zones. Medical systems become overwhelmed, not just by infected patients, but by the psychological trauma affecting healthcare workers who've watched colleagues get torn apart by former patients. Here's the brutal truth about survival psychology. Most people wouldn't adapt like Leon Kennedy or Jill Valentine. These characters represent the absolute peak of humanity capability under extreme stress. Real people freeze up, make irrational decisions, or simply give up when faced with impossible situations. Regional variations in government response create pockets of hope and despair. Authoritarian governments with strong military control might maintain order longer through brutal enforcement. Democratic societies struggle with civil liberties versus survival, often choosing debate over decisive action. Island nations like New Zealand or Madagascar could theoretically maintain isolation, but even they depend on global supply chains for essential resources. The psychology of denial becomes humanity's greatest enemy. Even with overwhelming evidence, many people refuse to accept the reality of reanimated dead. They continue normal routines, go to work, send children to school, creating perfect conditions for viral spread. By month 3, global infrastructure would be collapsing as the T-virus spreads across every inhabited continent. Humanity's survival odds drop to a devastating 15%. Geography becomes destiny in the post-outbreak world. Remote locations with natural barriers, mountain communities, isolated islands, Arctic research stations have the highest survival rates. These areas combine physical isolation with populations already adapted to self-sufficiency and harsh conditions. Government types that survive longest share common traits: strong centralized authority, military discipline, and willingness to make harsh decisions quickly. Switzerland's underground bunker networks and Singapore's water independence give them advantages most nations lack. The science of zombie decay works against the endless hordes depicted in game lore. Without active immune systems, zombie tissue would decompose rapidly in warm climates. Bacterial infections, insect damage, and simple weathering would reduce zombie populations significantly within months. However, the T-virus's ability to preserve basic motor functions might extend this timeline unpredictably. Resource scarcity drives the new economy. Clean water becomes more valuable than gold. Fuel supplies dwindle without refinery operations, making vehicle travel increasingly rare. Ammunition becomes the ultimate currency, but production requires complex supply chains that no longer exist. Survivor communities form around practical necessities rather than the dramatic scenarios shown in Resident Evil. Real groups organize around existing infrastructure: military bases, hospitals, schools, or large retail stores. Leadership typically falls to individuals with practical skills: doctors, mechanics, farmers, rather than action heroes. The mutation factor represents humanity's greatest long-term threat. In a global environment with billions of infected hosts, the T-virus would continue evolving in unpredictable directions. New variants might develop resistance to environmental factors, increased intelligence, or enhanced transmission methods. Each mutation could restart the infection cycle in previously cleared areas. By year 1, organized government resistance would be crumbling as the virus mutates in ways no one anticipated. Humanity's survival odds sink to just 8%. Historical precedent offers both hope and sobering reality. The Black Death killed 30 to 60% of Europe's population. The 1918 flu pandemic claimed 50 million lives, but didn't collapse civilization. However, those pathogens didn't reanimate their victims or continue evolving into new bioweapons. Technology preservation becomes critical for long-term survival. Modern civilizations depend on incredibly complex systems that require specialized knowledge to maintain. Nuclear power plants need constant monitoring, water treatment facilities require chemical supplies, and communication networks demand technical expertise. Survivor communities must balance immediate survival needs against preserving knowledge for future generations. The psychological toll on survivors would be unprecedented. Post-traumatic stress disorder, survivor guilt, and depression would affect nearly everyone who lived through the initial outbreak. Children born post-outbreak would face unique challenges. Growing up in a world where constant vigilance against bioweapon threats becomes normal. Their psychology would be fundamentally different from pre-outbreak humans. Maintaining humanity itself becomes the greatest challenge. When survival depends on making brutal decisions daily, the line between civilization and barbarism blurs quickly. Communities that preserve education, art, and ethical frameworks alongside practical skills have better long-term prospects than those focused purely on military survival. The Umbrella legacy haunts any rebuilding efforts. Corporate accountability becomes impossible in a collapsed world, but the knowledge that human greed and ambition caused the apocalypse would shape survivor societies. Trust in large organizations or centralized authority might never fully recover. After 5 years, small survivor communities would be established in isolated areas, but the constant threat of bioweapon evolution would keep humanity's survival odds at just 5%. Statistical analysis paints a grim picture for humanity's long-term prospects. Even in the most optimistic scenarios, we're looking at a global population reduction of 93 to 97%. That means out of today's 8 billion people, only 240 to 560 million would survive a full T-virus outbreak. The biological reality of zombie decomposition offers some hope. Without active immune systems or cellular repair mechanisms, zombie tissue would break down within 16 to 18 months in most climates. Extreme cold might preserve them longer, while tropical heat would accelerate decay. Remote populations might never encounter the outbreak at all. Research stations in Antarctica, isolated Pacific islands, and nomadic groups in the Sahara or Amazon could remain completely unaffected. These populations, though small, would preserve human genetic diversity and cultural knowledge. Comparing our scenario to historical population bottlenecks is sobering. The Toba supervolcano eruption 74,000 years ago may have reduced human population to as few as 10,000 individuals. A T-virus outbreak would leave more survivors, but in a world with destroyed infrastructure and ongoing bioweapon threats. Environmental factors ultimately determine humanity's final survival odds. Climate change, resource depletion, and ecosystem collapse would continue even after zombie populations decline. Humanity's long-term survival depends entirely on isolated communities and favorable environmental conditions, giving us final odds of just 3%. The mathematics are brutal but clear. An umbrella-level T-virus outbreak would push humanity to the brink of extinction, with only small isolated communities surviving in remote locations. Unlike the heroic narratives we see in games, real survival would depend more on geography and luck than individual skill or government response. What do you think would be humanity's best survival strategy? Share your apocalypse survival plan in the comments below, and then hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the science behind other fictional disasters.